And I'm here this week with Christina Fonthes about her brand new debut novel, Where You Go, I Will Go. Thank you so much for joining me today, Christina.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here.
So, this book is your debut novel, and you started writing it during the wonder that was the pandemic back in
Yes,
2020. So, it's been a while.
it's been a
And
while.
And I read the book recently and I absolutely loved it. We've already had a bit of a conversation about certain opinions,
Yes.
which made me laugh. But for those who haven't read the blurb yet, do you want to go into the story and talk about how the story develops and also where the idea came from?
Definitely. So, I would say that this story is lots of different things. It really covers multiple identities that I myself has as a writer or as a person. But first and foremost, I would say that is a dual POV. So we have like a mother-daughter storyline, and we also have two different timelines happening. We have it kind of opens up in modern day London, just as the Marriage Equality Act is being pronounced in the UK, is being passed by Parliament. And then on the other timeline is in Kinshasa, where we meet one of the protagonists, who is a young bourgeois Congolese, or at that time it was called Zairian girl from a upper middle class family whose dad is running for governor. And all she's interested in is really partying, having a great time, being with her friends, and she suddenly falls in love with the wrong person. And it kind of follows her journey as her life spirals, navigating that relationship and everything that comes out of it. And on the flip side, as we open up in London, as LGBTQ laws are being passed, we meet the other main character, who's Bijou, who left Congo when she was very young, just before the war broke out, and found herself living in London with her aunt. And she has two different identities. So she's a churchgoer with her aunt. She's very obedient. She's kind of like the good girl. But then she has a completely different identity where she's also in the wrong relationship. And we find out that she's actually dating a woman, and she's out in Peckham frolicking, going to all these queer events and then going to church on Sundays. And it's really about these two, their relationships. But I say that it's more than that. It also explores, sibling relationships, because we see the relationship between the two sisters, which is Mia and her older sister, and how that develops over time, how that breaks down, and kind of, how that's built, and then their relationship with their mother as well. And then, female relationships, LGBTQ relationships. There are so many different types of relationships, both platonic and non-platonic. Because to me, that's what's interesting. It's, I love characters, I love books about characters, but I also love plot. So it's very important to have an actual plot where something happens, where there is a climax, where we are kind of waiting to see, will they, won't they? And the last thing that I will say is that this is, when I talk about the book, I say that this is my love letter to London. This is my love letter to council estates. This is my love letter to queer African lives, because I think that in this book, we kind of follow, there's more than one queer character, which I really love. Obviously, we have the main characters, but there are also other minor queer characters. And that's just to show the diversity, because often when we read queer books, it's kind of, okay, there's a main character who's queer and their love interest, and then that's it. We don't really explore any other type of queerness. We don't explore their environment. And so this is a love letter to that as well. And a love letter to council estates, because again, it's something that I don't really see when I read literature. We don't really see what these people's lives are like.
That's true.
But they exist. There are so many council estates in the UK. And people have this weird view of, the kind of people that come from. And it's interesting because I come from a council estate, but there's
So do
also
I.
there's also a very famous actor whose name I won't say, who comes from the same council estate as me. And he's doing brilliant things, absolutely amazing things. He's gone over to America and done amazing things there. He's talented. And he's very, very well known. And we both came from the same council estate. And so, you know, it's that love letter to council estates. And there's also lots of music in it because I'm Congolese. And if you ask somebody, you know, about the Congo, they'll say two things. They'll either talk about the war or they'll talk about music, which are two very different things.
I was going to say there's a massive contrast there.
A massive
One does
contrast.
get inspired by the other to a degree.
Definitely, you know. And so that's why, you know, I definitely say it's a love letter to music. I had to have music in there because growing up Congolese music is everywhere. Kind of regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of whether or not you're religious, there will be music, you know, as you're growing up. And so there's so much music in there. Because I just couldn't write, you know, a novel without injecting some musicality. So yeah, I would say that for now without revealing too much.
I was going to say it's very much also a story of multiple layers of conflict, because you've got the internal conflict, then you've got the familial conflict, and then you've got the national conflict with the war in Congo, or Zaire as it was. I mean, I was alive at that point. So
Yes.
that's how we learned the names of the countries. But there were so many layers to that, because it was almost as though one was reflecting the other, because obviously you've got Mira, who is conflicted with her own need to break out, to act out, and to enjoy herself.
Yes.
And then you've got her conflict with her mother and her father that are very much, oh, it's all about appearances. You cannot do this. There's so much trouble going on. You can't be seen as someone who's causing all these problems.
And she doesn't care.
And she really doesn't care. And then obviously, then you get to the whole story in, well, not even, you don't even reach England before there's even further conflict, because you've got her experience with Chantal and Antoine, and is it Jacques in France?
Yes, it's
all of that. I mean, that as well, that creates a further layer of pain for Mira before she gets to the point that she's in England. So you've got all of those things as well. There's so many strands going on as you get, before you even get to the point where you've got Tante Muriel and Bijou in England and their own conflict.
Exactly. And I think for me, those, again, it's kind of, those are the stories that I like, the stories that I find interesting. I think that it's very easy to kind of have a villain and a hero story, and to just paint somebody as, you know, they're a terrible person. I can't believe they've done this. What makes it interesting is to see what has led them to this point. And kind of to see, you know, these are the decisions that they've had to make. And so we can see why now this is, you know, and not to excuse any kind of behavior, you know, but it's we're humans and things happen, and very messed up things happen to people. And I think that's one of the messages that I wanted to get across, is people are put in situations they don't want to be in. People do not ask to be born into these circumstances. People do not, you know, you fall in love with the wrong person. You know, you don't ask to fall in love, you know. And also the characters are quite young. Mira is very young when all of this is happening, and that's the other thing as well. I wanted her to be a young character. She wasn't, you know, and this is why we meet her at the beginning, when, you know, when she is young, and kind of for us to think about, okay, when I was that age, what was I thinking about, you know? And you've got, you see your life in one way, you see, this is where I want my life to be, this is where I want to go, and you're very secure in everything. Mary is very secure, she's very confident. You know, she isn't timid at all, she knows what she wants. And she's also actually got a very good relationship with her parents, because even though her parents are strict and they are imposing, she doesn't feel, she's not afraid of them, you know. She does things because she wants to, even though she knows it's going to get her in trouble, but she's not afraid of them. She doesn't have that kind of fear. It's only afterwards that fear kind of comes in, you know, and that's really because of the shame more so than the fear, you know.
The consequences that she hadn't. I think there's the older you get, the more you look at teenagers and you see that they believe they're Teflon.
Exactly.
There's this moment of, I'm immortal, nothing is going to affect me, nothing is going to hurt me. And you see it as they walk across the road holding their phones, not paying attention. And
That's
in
it.
your head as an adult, you're thinking, because you can see the car coming, or you can
Yes.
see that the traffic lights are suddenly turning green, and
Yeah.
your brain goes, this isn't a good idea. I
Yeah.
can see something bad. But I think
Yeah.
that's something that you get when you're older. You
Yeah,
don't have
definitely.
that. I mean, Mira was 16 at the
Yeah.
start of the book,
Yeah.
but obviously it has that dual timeline.
Hmm.
But it kind of has a dual timeline that includes Mira, but it also is Bijou's story.
Hmm.
So we've got the almost like a triple layer
Yeah,
story going on, because
definitely.
we see Muriel, we see Mira, we see Bijou,
Yeah.
and as the story continues, the timelines converge,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's when you start to realize, wow,
Yeah.
I did not see coming. And I'm not going to say what it is, but there are certain things I was reading the book and I was like, oh, I hope that person gets their comeuppance. And I really hope this happens, because
Yeah.
you have such a passionate view about these characters. The more you
Mm.
read about them, the more you are sort of kind of like gritting your teeth and making
Mm.
fists, because there are certain situations that make you angry. And it's
Yeah.
not because the person's horrible, it's because you
Yeah.
can see that they've been kind of cornered.
Yeah. I
And
think
it
that's
makes
a
you
good word.
upset for them, but it also makes you really angry at the person that's standing there blocking their way.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, for me, those are the most interesting stories, when we go beyond the she made a bad choice, or I would have done that if I were in her position, or, this is your fault entirely. And just to show humanity, we are complex creatures. And I just wanted to, I think as a writer as well, it's important for me to show some sort of development, whether that's, from good to bad or bad to good, or if not, even if it's as black and white as good to bad, but just to show some sort of change in the character, the person that we met to the person that we end with. I don't really want to the reader to sort of be like, oh wow, like that's a journey,
Yeah,
like that's a whole journey. And I think that was really important for me to show that early childhood, that innocence, again, that teenager, that wanting to dance. How do you end up from at a nightclub
yeah.
when you should have been at, when it was a school night and your dad's running for governor, to in this very weird place in London, which I won't say because we don't want any spoilers.
No, we do not want any spoilers. But there are so many different facets to each of the characters,
Mm,
because obviously it's as Bijou has this war, as you said, with who she is who she is expected to be, the
yeah,
respectable daughter, the practicing Christian who attends church every week, who goes to church groups, and the girl and she's a lawyer, isn't she?
yeah. She's a paralegal.
She's a
Uh,
paralegal, so she's incredibly
paralegal.
intelligent, which is blatantly obvious from a lot of the things that she says and a lot of the ways that she reacts. But there's also this element of, I cannot disappoint my family.
Hmm.
She still has that incessant need or to impress or make them
Yeah,
happy. And
yeah.
that sends her down a path that makes her miserable.
Yes, it does. And Bijou is actually, she's actually very lost. And I think that this is this is one of the sort of outcomes of displacement. Um, because her spirit is kind of still stuck in Kinshasa, but it's stuck in Zaire. It's stuck at the house, it's stuck at Binza, it's stuck at grandma and grandpa, it's stuck at her parents. It's kind of, it's like a Black Mirror thing. She's stuck in this place that doesn't exist.
And she
And
doesn't,
it doesn't
there's also that
exist.
element, it did feel to me like she was, as you said, she's lost.
Yeah.
And she also doesn't know why she is where she is.
Exactly.
And I think that
Exactly.
if that had ever been explained to her, all of a sudden to be right, well, we're at home in the Congo with her family, with her mum and her dad and her grandparents and everyone else, and then all of a sudden it's like, right, you're going to London now.
Yeah, that's it. With
And there
no
was no
explanation.
explanation. I
Nothing.
mean, we do get one as the reader,
Yeah.
but it
But she has no
comes
idea.
very late in the book. So
Yeah.
not going to give it away, but it does come very late in the book. And so all this time you're really feeling for this girl who never wanted to be where she is.
At all.
Never, I mean, I don't think her life would have, I mean, would it have turned out the way it did if she had stayed where she was? Or would she have conformed further?
I think this is one of the I think that this is one of the if we can say disadvantages of displacement and of being part of the diaspora, because there is always that question of what would my life have been like had I not moved, you know, had I stayed there. And you romanticize it, but maybe it wouldn't have been like that. Maybe it would have been worse,
Mm.
you know, because of the environment that she was in. Um,
And
growing
also
up
the unrest that she was existing in when she was there with her
exactly,
parents.
exactly. Because also, like I say, it's like this, she's just stuck in this place of, you know, I had a really great childhood. Girl, you didn't. You painted this picture because if you really think about it, you know, if she took the time to actually really go back and think, oh, maybe this image that I had isn't quite true. Maybe there were moments of silence back then, but she's completely romanticized. But she also left quite young as well, you know, and there were so many things like we go back and we see, you know, just before she left and we have the riots and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Like there's so much going on. And so, like I say, this is one of the kind of issues that people have when as a result of displacement, of a result of having to leave home and to go somewhere else, your mind is always, what if I had stayed? What would things have been like? You know, because
Yeah.
that's a very possible thing. You could have
It's the
stayed.
same with a lot of things. My dad passed away when I was 11, and I sometimes think, well, what would it have been different if he lived? Would we have done this?
Yeah,
Would my parents have still been together? And we were
exactly.
supposed to move to New Zealand when I was 2,
There
and my
you
mum
go.
changed her mind at the last minute. Would things
Mm,
have been different? Would my dad have still been alive if we'd
there we
moved to New
go.
Zealand? And
There
you
we
do
go.
start having this kind of, you romanticize, as you
Yeah,
said, romanticize the way that things were, because
yeah,
the way that things are isn't exactly how you want it to be.
exactly. And I'm sorry to hear about your dad.
It's 40 years this year, which is
Yeah,
really weird, really
yeah,
weird to think.
I can
But
imagine.
that's the thing, it's that you do romanticize the things that
Yes.
you think, well, if that had happened. And the problem is, it's that path less traveled.
Hmm.
And I think that is one of the things with Bijou. She was constantly looking at the path that she hadn't gone down
Yeah,
because she didn't like the path she was on. And I don't
exactly.
blame her for not liking the path she was on.
Exactly. It's not great.
It's
Gosh.
not a great, I mean, she's got that, it's the split of this is the woman I am, this is the woman I love. I mean, her relationship with Kay, we don't get to see very much of,
Mm,
but we
mm,
do get to see, obviously, a lot of the fallout from that.
yeah,
And if
yeah.
Kay hadn't been going to New York, would she have had the strength to say no to everything that came afterwards?
And
But
this is it.
again, you don't know, because that's not what happened.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah. And I think, you know, back to the romanticizing and the contrast and Kay moving to New York, because Kay moving to New York really just opened up everything she thought that she could have had she stayed in Zaire. So for example, you know, she's living vicariously through Kay and through, even though she doesn't actually quite fit in that world either, she doesn't, that's not her world. You know, yes, they are Black African, you know, they are Black, they are Caribbean, they are Southeast Asian, and they are queer, but it's still not her world. And that's the other thing that I really wanted to show, is that, you know, queer isn't just this one thing. Black queer isn't just this one thing. You know, just like
It's a
um,
multitude of things. It's
it's a
not
multitude
only,
of things.
it's also about the life that she has when she's at home. It's not
Mhm.
only I've opened the doors and I've gone outside. It's the when I come home, I've got my super religious and very domineering aunt and all of her community putting all this pressure on me to be what
Yeah,
they need me to be.
exactly. Exactly. It's a lot. And I think that when she's with Kay, when she's in that world and everybody's kind of creative and she's working as a paralegal, but when she was back in Zaire, she was supposed to go to one of the best art schools,
Yeah,
you
she
know,
was creative.
on the continent. You know, she was meant to be a painter. She was having painting lessons at a very young age and was very talented. You know, and I think that what draws her to that world is not obviously just the queerness, but it's the creativity and you know that kind of freeness. Because everybody there is creative. They are all artists. Kay is a photographer.
Yeah.
You know, and they have the open mic nights. And I think that's probably more attractive to her than the fact that they're all queer. You know,
She's hovering on the edge
there we go.
because while there's something she knows that she's got this art, this skill, this talent, she's very good at it, but
Yes.
she's had to kind of push it away
Yeah,
because of the expectations of everyone else.
that's
And
it.
that really did break my heart, because you could
Yeah.
see that there was this longing in her for something
Hmm.
so much more than she had, and she
Hmm.
kind of had to pack it all up in a box.
And I feel like Mihai had to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. They both had to pack everything up in a
Both
box
had to.
and then go, oh, this doesn't exist anymore. This
Exactly.
is not the person I'm allowed to be.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that frustrated me a lot as well, because I did feel
Mm.
like there was an incredible amount of unfair pressure placed
Yeah.
on them as women
Yes.
rather than the men that were kind of domineering. And well, that's the problem. I don't think that I do think there were a large element of people who were able to do what they wanted, but then
Mm.
you see brother Fabrice, and brother Fabrice
He's
is
just
like,
messed up.
he is so messed up, because there's something wrong with him from the start.
He's messed up.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with him, but there's something that just doesn't feel
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And their whole relationship, they're both
Completely
pushed
messed
into
up.
it,
Yeah.
and neither of them are happy.
Hmm.
And that's obvious from the start. And his mother, oh, his
Yeah.
mother was someone, I mean, she was someone I really wanted to just find the nearest window and push her from, because
She was a lot.
she was a lot. She really was that, the person that is, she was so cruel.
She was a lot.
And she also had such high expectations.
She was a lot. I think even writing her, it was kind of like, oh God, here we go again.
Were you inspired by anyone or by any stories in creating any of these characters, though?
I think that she actually had a very, and again, this is, you know, this is the beauty of, you know, editing and editing and redrafting. She actually
Yeah,
had a whole backstory that we took out because my agent, you know, was
yeah,
kind of like, we don't need all of this about her. Because again, I really wanted to make everybody whole. You know,
yeah,
I didn't want villains to just be villains. I wanted so she actually has a whole backstory. And when you hear her backstory, obviously, you know, I think you get snippets of it in the final draft. You know, because we explain that she, you know, she came from a very poor family, and then her husband, who is brother Fabrice's father, kind of like picked her up. But she had a whole backstory. And so when you read her backstory, you're like, okay, now I can see why she's like this, because she doesn't ever want to be in the position that she was in before ever again, you know, and you see why she's kind of like really holding on to, you know, onto Bijou and to her, you know, and being really overbearing and trying to control everything. Because again, we go back and we, you know, in the to make it in the final draft, that we really went deep
yeah.
and kind of saw why she is the way she is, because I don't believe that people are just evil. I mean,
Oh
some
no.
people are D's, you know, some people are literally, I don't know if I could run the podcast, but some people are very terrible people. I'm not
Yeah.
going to, you know, I'm not going to be like everybody has a redeeming feature. I don't believe that. I do believe there are people who sell arms. There are people who benefit from war, especially coming from a country like Congo. There are people who are evil.
Oh,
What you're doing
absolutely. I think that's the
is
thing. It's
terrible.
you sort of watch certain TV shows and read certain books, and it's like, oh, that character's getting a redemption arc,
Yeah,
and you sit there watching it, and you think, but after everything they did, they
after
don't
everything.
deserve a redemption arc. And there are characters that don't,
Yeah, yeah,
because life isn't, as you said earlier, life isn't all black and white. It's not
it's
all,
really
there
not.
are so many shades of grey that sort of
Yeah,
are in that middle spectrum. But then there are those people that are just 100%, yeah, no, I'm sorry, you
terrible.
don't
Yeah,
deserve my time.
yeah. And there was the one character in there that did not have any redeeming features. Like there was no way we were ever gonna, you know, kind of delve into that story and say, oh, well, this is why that happened. That was just terrible, you know. That character was actually just a very terrible person. But
I
yeah, I
think I know
think
who you mean.
yeah, we were never ever gonna, you know, because again, I think that's all. I also think that's unfair to the victims, you know, and
Yeah,
to people who have suffered at the hands of other people to kind of be like, oh, well, this is why they did it, particularly when it's been done multiple times. But yeah, I think my yeah, back to answer your question about, you know, taking kind of inspiration. I think that there are, you know, Brother Fabrice's mother is every, you know, mother-in-law horror story, mother-in-law. Every, you know, we
yeah.
hear so many about mother-in-law. I hate my mother-in-law. I've got such a bad relationship. You know, my mother-in-law is a terrible person. Everybody knows that one.
It used to be, it was the cliche joke in the 70s and 80s
There you
was,
go.
my mother-in-law did this.
There you
What's
go.
the only good mother-in-law is, yeah, that kind of thing. I think that's a long-standing, a long-running
Long-standing
joke.
thing.
But at the same
Yeah,
time, I mean, that's why you date orphans, not, yeah, but anyway.
exactly. Exactly. So I, you know, I do take inspiration from real life, because this is something that nobody's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe my mother-in-law's, it's horrible. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised at that, you know. And
They just
whilst it
need
is
to
a
go on Reddit.
stereotype, exactly, exactly, you know. But yeah, I think, yeah, truly, really, truly, it was just really about giving people some sort of redeeming quality. I don't even think it's a redeeming quality. I think really it's about creating humans rather than creating characters.
Yeah.
I always say, you know, when I'm talking about writing and others are coming with manuscripts and asking questions, I always say, if you think of your characters as characters, they will be just that. But if you think of your characters as people, they will then be people, you know, and that makes for much more interesting writing than just writing a character, I
Yeah.
think, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I think you're right. What about the because obviously we know religion plays a very big part in the book. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a character on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the church that Dante Muriel is part of
Mhm.
is very strict.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it takes scripture word for word.
Mm. I think that in the Congolese community, in my experience, I would say there are very few, you know, you either in the church or you're not in the church. I think there's very, very few space for kind of like the middle ground. We just go to church on Sundays,
Or
and we
we just go
celebrate
to church at
Christmas.
Easter.
There we go. You
I've had
know, there.
I've got family. I think everybody's got a member of their family who is like that. It's like, I go to church on Easter and Christmas
There we
Eve.
go. That's it. You know, um, there are very few people like that. It's really, it's Congolese people are very extreme. And it is always either they don't go to church at all because of things like this, you know, that happens in the book, you know,
Yeah.
because of instances like this. They kind of just stay away, don't want anything to do with it, don't want their kids to have anything to do with it. And they are still Christian, they still, you know, of the faith, they'll pray at home, they'll pray before eating their food, but they just, you know, stay away from churches because there are too many stories, too many things that come out, you know, this pastor did this is what happened, really horrible things. But this has been going on, this isn't just in Congolese churches, this is in the Catholic Church as a whole. The Vatican, so many stories coming out.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's one of those. I think that's why there are two subjects they say you shouldn't discuss: religion and politics.
There we go. And in some countries, football, because it's
yes.
it's just as it's just as Brazil, stay away from football, don't talk about that, because it's also very political, and in Congo it's music. I mean, music is political. Who you listen to is a strong indicator of who you are as a person, supposedly. What your morals are, what your values are, etc.
Well, my playlist would be very interesting then, because it's mostly 1980s twee pop.
But yeah, I would say that it's like that. But yeah, I think I was having a conversation recently with somebody who went to Italy, and they were talking about just the contrast when you go to the Vatican and the wealth, and then there's people outside who are homeless and hungry.
Yes.
And so it's no different in the book at all. It's just, again, it's a reflection of real life. This happens not just in Congolese churches, in Catholic churches, in any kind of institution where there's money and there's power, and it corrupts, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So again,
power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely. I didn't come up with it.
No, I didn't either. I think it's one of those. It's a very strong message, though. I think it's a very strong message, and obviously you have Papa Pastor, who is the head of the church that Muriel and Bijou attend, and he is obsessed with everybody else following the rules. It's do as I say, not as I do.
And again, with him, I will say, that he also has a backstory. That I did lots of, and this is why I wanted to write people and not just characters. He wasn't just Papa. So he also had a backstory, which obviously didn't make it into the final version. But for me, it was important for me to have this in my mind as I was writing what he was doing. Because he also came from a very disadvantaged background. And found Christ. His backstory is that he actually found Christ in a real, pure, authentic way. And Christ did save his life, and he was saved. It's just that he's human, and the power went to his head, but he actually started off with very pure intention.
But I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? You get these characters, and when the writing process is one of those, I mean, for me personally, I find that I have always created a very strong backstory. And as with a novel, it doesn't necessarily get into the end product.
Yes.
But the motivations and what drives the character. So when you're writing a specific action, as there were multiple moments in here where I didn't like him as a character at all. I found the entire church process incredibly overbearing. It was as though it was driving anything pure out of all of these people. And it was supposed to be making them nice. Because you always think of, show Christian feeling and generosity. And then you see these people, you see the hierarchy of the church. And it was this feeling of discomfort. Rather than warmth that came across whenever you were reading about it.
Yeah. And I love the word that you use. I love that you use the word hierarchy, because that is definitely something that, I think is in the church. Again, regardless of which denomination, it's something that exists. Bijou has trouble leaving because it's also her home. And again, it's not that kind of like, it's just a horrible place. It's just a horrible place. She also has memories there. She has, even though her brother Fabrice go through this weird thing, she also has memories of, growing up with him. And I think she talks about, there's a scene where she used to put on his Game Boy, and they got up to mischief when they were in the old school hall. It's still home, and it still plays a role. It's still part of her community.
And that's it, isn't it? With especially with Mira and Bijou, they have very, very strong memories of the people in their lives, their childhoods. But at the same time, Mira, there are certain parts of her life that she seems to shed, partially
Definitely.
because she's made to,
Yeah.
and partially because if she kept them, they would be destructive.
Yes, it would be way too much to deal with everything, to carry everything that she's carried. And it starts off in Kinshasa, and then she actually, again, without giving away too much, she leaves Kinshasa and ends up in the village in Bandaka, and something happens there. And then she's in Brussels, and she has that whole thing in Brussels, and then she's in Paris. It's a lot to carry all of that,
And it
in all
happens
those.
in such a compressed time as well.
There we go. It's like literally one after the other. And I think just for her mental health, she really needs to like sort of suppress it.
So the
And
church at that point is proving her savior for her
there we
mental
go.
health,
There we go.
but it becomes her personality.
There you go. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. Because the church are used to dealing with trauma. And people talk about, when people talk about therapy, there are different ways of doing therapy. There isn't just the kind of like you pay the person and it's a complete stranger. I think the church has been doing therapy for a long time, especially Congolese churches, because I remember after church there would always be a line outside of the pastor's door, and people are waiting their turn to go in to kind of just lay their burdens down. And they just, so, before the pastor left, it just like Sundays would just be like, okay, next, it's therapy, it's therapy.
That's
And
what
so in that
confession is,
regard,
really.
sorry,
That's what confession is in a way. It's like lay all your stuff
there you
and then I'll
go.
give you some penance
There
and
you
you're gone.
go.
It's done.
There you go. Definitely, that's definitely a version of it. Yeah, I have nobody else to speak to. I'll go to, I'll wait till confessions. And so I think, they are used to dealing with that. They are used to people coming in. When we say that somebody's saved from what? Some crazy dark past is what they're saved from. Nobody who's like, who you hardly ever get these stories of I was just fine. It's always I was living a really, empty life, or I was doing this, I was into drugs, I was into alcohol, I was addicted to whatever, and then I
Yeah.
found the church. We always get these stories, testimonials, which we have a lot of in the story as well. And so I think that the church are actually very used to dealing with people who are dealing with trauma.
From personal experience, therapy isn't about throwing all those memories away. It's about learning how to deal with them.
Yeah, and I would also say it's about learning to see them differently.
Yeah.
Because I think that when you're in the trauma, you view things one way, and then I think what therapy allows you to do, again, as somebody who has also been through therapy, different types of therapy, is that it allows you to so many of them. It's become like it's become like this, like there's like different flavors of therapy now,
Yeah.
which is great though. It does allow for you to view it from a different angle.
Yeah.
To see that, oh, actually this is what my mind was telling me, but in fact that's not the story. So I think that, yeah, therapy is very, very powerful tool, and I think that the church does take on that role, of being a therapist, of being the mental health provider, and kind of skewing it to meet their own needs. But again, I don't think that it's just that they're pure evil. I think that they do think they're doing her favor.
Yeah,
She comes and she's
absolutely.
depressed, and she's been wearing Antoine's blazer for like a year. She's been absolutely distraught. Her mind is still in Paris, and
Grief
this
is a
massive
really
trauma.
tough emotion.
Yeah.
At any age, it's a very, very tough emotion. I think the thing that really came to me is therapy is different for everybody, and
Mhm.
they blanket, they treat
Mhm.
everybody exactly the same, and that's not
Definitely.
the way to go about it when somebody is going
Definitely.
through such grief and trauma and has
Definitely.
so many other things on their plate as well.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that there's also lots of theatrics around it as well, which makes it kind of seem, grander than it is. Again, with a therapist, you kind of go there, you don't really have the therapist, the lounge, the chaise longue where you lie down and, like
No,
they
mine
depict.
had a beautiful. I went to her house. She had a beautiful living room and a beautiful view over the sea from a balcony, and it was lovely. And I used
Yeah.
to, it sounds weird, it was really nice going there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Getting there was lovely, but then actually being there, and she was there more to listen and bounce things
Mm,
off and then
mm,
give her perspective. But I
mm.
think that every therapist is different and
Oh,
every single
definitely,
person reacts to therapy differently, which is why
definitely,
there are so many
definitely.
of them.
Exactly, definitely. Um, but yeah, to your point, you're going to therapists and it's their home. Yes, it's got a beautiful view of the sea, but it's their home, and you're there and you're talking. Whereas this one, there's so much drama. There's this whole, we're cutting off the hair and we're taking off the clothes and we're burning the pictures, and there's all of this.
It's almost like The Exorcist, may the power of Christ compel you.
Yeah, which is what's happening, and I think that makes it a lot more dramatic, and so the reaction is also a lot more dramatic. So rather than kind of I'm just sitting in the living room telling you what's happening and you're giving me, like advice, or you're talking to me, no, we're doing this whole theatrics thing. Same with Bijou. When it
Oh,
happens to Bijou,
that one was, I mean, that one was far more traumatic for me
that was
than
difficult to
Brielle.
write.
That was, I mean, that
Yeah,
was full on.
that was difficult to write. That was very difficult to write because I think that they're coming from two different places. Mireille is kind of, she's going there voluntarily.
Yep.
She wants this to happen. She's been going to the church, she's been invited by Mama Chantal, and by the end of it, she wants this to happen. She wants this, this thing to be rid of it. And and so she brings it all in. And on the flip side, and again, this is why I wanted to have the two different timelines and to show that,
Yeah.
they're going through different things, going through the same thing. But Bijou, it's really forced upon her. And that's a much different experience, to have something happen to you than to willingly, even if the circumstances, sort of, dangerous circumstances, but to willingly, volunteer yourself to go through something and then to be thrust into it are very,
That's
very
it.
different.
It felt like Bijou was threatened
She
almost
was,
into
yeah,
going into that. It's
yeah.
either you do this or you've lost everyone.
It's an act of violence. With Bijou, it's an act of violence. It was an act of, and that's why at the end of it, they both come out of it different, but the same. There is a sort of whiteness, a sort of everything's kind of been erased.
Yeah, it's blank.
It's blank. It's just a blank space. They're kind of like this white room. I kind of see it as. But what it does do is it allows them both to continue the next stages of their lives. Whilst it has been a rather traumatic experience for Bijou, at the end of it, she's ready for the next stage of her life. She's now mentally prepared. Okay, this is how it's going to be. You know,
But it's
um,
almost like she's a blank, not only a blank slate of I'm ready for this, it's a emotionless blank slate. It's kind of
that's
like,
it.
I'm just going to go through this. I'm a Stepford
That's
wife
it.
now.
That's it. That's it. She's programmed. And the emotion is gone. Um, and the same, I'm drawing parallels between the two. So the same with Mireille, the emotion is gone. The attachment that she had, the grieving, the love also,
Mm.
because she was still in love with him. He was, she was literally in love with him. He
Yeah,
was just
but then having Bijou in her life doesn't bring any love back. It's almost as though
no,
she's a shell of the person
yeah,
she was. There's no joy there anymore.
nothing at all.
It's just my duty is to the church,
That's
and
it.
therefore you're going to.
That's it. So I would say it's kind of a reset. It's like a factory reset. um and now we're ready
The
for
thing with
this
the
next stage.
factory reset is there's room to add things on top, and where Bijou does, Mirai doesn't.
And there we go.
That feels to me, because obviously Bijou has this empty relationship with Fabrice, and it is very empty.
I don't
From
even know
both,
what that is.
it's
It's
not
so
only, it's
strange and
not only,
awkward.
that's the thing, it's not only her going into it going, well, I don't want to marry him, but it's expected, so I'm going to marry him.
Yeah.
It's him also going into it going, well, I've got to marry her, so I'm going to marry her. I don't really want to, but it's what's
At all.
expected. So there's
Yeah.
there's nothing to grow on there. There's there's not even any sympathy on either side. There's no empathy from them. It's like, I know what you're going through, because they don't talk.
Their relationship is so strange and awkward. Awkward is the only way that I can describe it, because I think that it would have been less awkward had they been complete strangers.
Yeah.
You know, had it been, oh, you know, like this is somebody from a different church, or this is, you know, the pastor's nephew or whatever. You know, and we're just gonna match you, but it's somebody that you grew up with.
And
know?
all of the lead up to it is, oh, well, I saw this person told me they saw you marrying him,
It's
and
crazy.
this is what you're going to do. She's not asked, is this what you want?
No.
She is outright told. And when
This is
there's
what's going to
any
happen.
sign of of rebellion, which she
Yeah.
gives them, the entire torturous exorcism, really emotional exorcism, is what she's given. And it's almost like they want every single woman in the church to be a supplicant.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And that's
And
terrifying.
it is terrifying, but again, it's like The Handmaid's Tale. There are so many examples of this in literature, in everyday life. We draw examples from things that are, you know, that are happening in reality. You know.
The Mansons.
Yes, it happens.
With with his handmaids and everything. I mean, I think that's the thing. When you read this book, there is so much that makes you angry at the fact that this is the way that they are forced to live, and this is the way that people feel about who they are. They're not allowed to be the person they are because their family won't accept it. So they put on a facade and pretend, and it must be so exhausting.
So exhausting, you know, but it's sort of, and I think this is why Bijou, I say, you know, she has the, you know, the issue of displacement, because she's already in a place that she doesn't, that's not a natural environment to her. London isn't a natural environment to her in any way at all. None of it is, you know, and it's not only, she only really starts to enjoy London, or that, you know, that part of her life much later when we meet somebody else.
That story, I mean, that entire story is up and down, but it's so heartwarming.
Yeah.
Because you do start to see her finally realize who she is. Yeah, also realize who she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
definitely.
That's the thing. I think that's one of the things that I took away from the book, is that everybody finally realizes the person they are meant to be.
Yeah.
When events force them out of their comfort zone. And their comfort zone is, I'm going to keep quiet, I'm going to do what everybody says, and I'm not going to react in any way that is going to be considered rebellion.
Yeah. And you know, at the very, I think, like in chapter 1, it's, I think, you know, it's silence, the book, that's kind of sets the tone. Everybody is silent all the time. And some people are silenced, you know, like Mihai was silenced because she definitely wasn't like that at the start of the book. She was very loud, but she silenced, you know. But to your point of, you know, that heartwarming relationship between her and the other person, I really, and then people finding their voices, I think that was really important to have, you know, that ending with wholesome, you know, with people being whole, because for so much of the book they are broken.
Even when she sees those people from her life with Kay, when she goes to Brighton, she it doesn't come across as her being comfortable.
No.
Because it's like, well, these people, I know them, but do I really? They don't know me, and my life has changed a lot since I last saw them. And
it's exposed.
Yeah, she is she's like an exposed nerve.
Yeah, she's
But
completely
finally,
exposed.
when Mirai actually gets the confidence to say something, that's when everything kind of, they all seem to break out and the silence ends.
That's it. And it was really important for the silence to end. I didn't want to write something
It ended with, and they didn't say anything.
and they didn't say anything, and they were exactly the same, and nobody learned any lessons. I really wanted them to find joy. I wanted I
Well, they
wanted them
found
to
their
have
music.
joy. Yeah, there
They
we
did
go.
find their music.
They found it. I wanted them to find joy. I really wanted um them to have, you know, hope, because there is also hope at the end of it. It's not kind of like, oh, well, they're stuck here. There's so many things, there are so many possibilities, there are so many things for them to move on, you know, to do. You can imagine what their lives will be like after the book. What does that look like?
But only because they had the courage to say something. And that
Yeah.
was it all the way through. There was this secret that gets
Yeah.
revealed. I'm not going to go into it, but there is a massive secret that is
Yeah.
underlying all of it. And you don't even realize that it is the
Not so
cause of
long.
all of this
Yeah.
until the very end.
Until the very end. And I think that it's, you know, they got to a point where it's like, we actually can't continue like this. Like, this is going to kill all of us. We have to, you know, we've all died a little death. And I think again, I don't want to give too much away.
It's so difficult, isn't it?
It's really difficult. But it's also, there is another person who, you know, is going to be there, who's going to be part of this family. And I think for that person who's coming, they're kind of like, we can't pass this on to another generation. You know,
Yeah,
like this,
that's the
we
thing.
kind
I
of have
mean,
to break the curse.
the story kind of goes in two circles,
Mhm.
which and it ends with the almost like it ends with the end of the first circle,
Yeah.
or rather, it kind of ends with the middle of the first circle,
Hmm.
but ties into the end of the second one, which I think
Yeah.
is really clever.
Yeah. Took a lot of edits to do that.
Do not envy that one.
There's a lot of edits.
Because the timelines were so interesting,
Mm.
because obviously you have the sort of the timeline that starts with Mirai in 1981,
Yeah.
Kinshasa, and then you have 2004, I think,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Bijou, and then you've obviously got everything that leads up to 1984.
Yeah, about that time.
End.
Yeah.
But you've also got the stuff that kind of starts to coalesce and bond together around the middle of the book, with Mirai's timeline and Bijou's timeline melding into one timeline.
Yeah.
And
Took a lot of edits.
I can only begin to imagine how complicated that was.
Yeah, I use Excel spreadsheets at one point to keep, yeah, because you have to keep everything aligned. You know, you have to, when you move something this way, how does it affect what's going on the other timeline?
Yeah,
You know, and then at what point do they come together?
Because I think that's the thing with, we get parts of her timeline, of the 1981 timeline. We
Yeah.
don't get all of it
Yeah.
until we get to 2007.
Yeah.
And then the big twist is revealed that actually
Yeah.
happened all the way back in 1981,
There we go.
that twists everything,
There
and
we
then
go.
has us ending at the beginning almost.
There we go. Yeah, and this is I don't know why I like to complicate life. Because I could have, you know, I bet looking back now, there's probably lots of different ways that I could have done that. But I will say that reading my favorite books, this is what I've always loved. So The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy is one of my top books of all time. I absolutely loved how she played around with time and timelines in that book. And the ending, I really wanted to do something, you know, an ending that was like a completely different timeline, like we go right to the beginning, but not really the beginning, you
Yes.
know. So it was all intentional. It wasn't this happy accident where I kind of just happened to, you know, create this, but this is
I was
very
going to say that would
intentional.
have been a very, very clever happy accident.
It definitely wasn't.
Because the
It
way
took a
that it
lot of,
ends with
yeah,
that, it's not even a big reveal, but the way it ends with that moment
yeah,
is like, this is the beginning.
yeah, yeah. I really want to, you know, there were so many edits getting to that moment because I always knew that I wanted to end at the beginning. You know, I wanted it to end at the start. I want this to be, because for me, that's, you know, that's what I enjoy. I love it when writers are putting in the effort. This is why I adore literary fiction, because I just love, you know, going on these journeys. I love, you know, these beautiful reveals. Not quite going, knowing where you're going, but kind
Mm.
of leading you along, you know. And as I say, like The God of Small Things is a book that really did that for me. There were so many emotions. She put out so many emotions, really
So what,
messed up things
so what other
that
books
happened.
inspired you and your on your writing journey?
I would say, what's the name of the book again? What is it called? Oh God, I've read it so many times, I've forgotten the book.
If
What
I'm
is it
not looking
called?
straight at it, sometimes I forget.
What is her name? She's a Palestinian author, American Palestinian author. And it's again 2 or 3 different timelines. Oh, wow, I've read this book so many times and I forgot forgotten what it's called. If I look on my Kindle, it'll probably come up. Um, but that it will probably come. Here we go. A Woman Is No Man. I told you it'll be on my Kindle. um, by Etaf Rum, A Woman Is No Man. And that's, you know, that really inspired, really pushed me to write the book as well. Like whenever I read that, I was really like, okay, like these stories need to be told, because you don't always know, you know, you don't always feel that validation. Before you become a published author, you're like, oh, am I doing too much? Is this too much trauma? Is this, I don't want to be another trauma story. I don't want to be another Black woman writing about trauma or another queer trauma story.
So
But
I
reading
think,
that book, yeah.
yeah, I think the thing is with this book is you are talking about a time that many of us were alive for,
Mm,
but wasn't really talked about,
mm,
because obviously the whole Zaire conflict, the
mhm,
civil war,
mhm.
it was probably a sideline story,
Yes, yes,
especially here,
yes,
and actually probably here and most of
yeah,
the white Western world. It was
yeah,
probably a side story, which is
yeah,
really sad because it's something we should be aware of.
definitely. And it's interesting that you say that, because whilst it was a sideline story here, in reality, London was changing.
Yeah,
And the reason that we have so many, that there is a Congolese community in London, you
it's
know, in
because
the
of
book I
this.
talk about, is because of this. You know, we have West Green Road, which is, you know, full of Congolese shops and, you know, other shops as well, Ghanaian, you know, Jamaican, et cetera, et cetera. But there is that direct correlation of when did Congolese people start appearing in the UK? It's at
Yeah,
that time because
but at the same, I think
they
the
had to leave.
issue is we are so. I wouldn't say that England is as insular as some other countries are,
Mm,
but when it comes to certain things, they're like, oh well, what news
definitely.
is affecting us?
Definitely, you know. But again, it's like I remember at school, being at school, and I remember being, you know, suddenly there were students from Kosovo, seemingly overnight, you know, appearing. You know, and it's again, you can go looking at like what was happening in Kosovo at that time, you know. So it's there, you know, there's direct correlation with, you know,
Yeah,
migration and growth. And when you see, you know, I don't want to say an influx because that's, you know, negative connotations to it, but when you
yeah.
see a growth of a certain population in one place, there's something happening politically. We don't
Yeah.
suddenly
Oh,
just wake up
absolutely.
and have the urge to come to the UK. Like
Yeah,
that
because our
doesn't,
weather's so glorious.
the weather's so great. It doesn't, you know, people are forced out, you know. And so that when I was reading A Woman Is No Man, and she was talking about Palestine, you know, and that book is like again, multiple timelines, and they talk about, you know, what's happening in the camps. you know, and some really, you know, for lack of a better word, traumatic but real stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
And what I love about literature, what I love, you know, I'm not a great reader of nonfiction, but what I love about literature is that I learn so much more about people than about things. You could read a nonfiction, you could read a newspaper, and it will say 5 million dead. What does 5 million dead mean? You know, but when you're reading a story,
It's about the
and it talks
person that's
about, there
experienced
you
it.
go, a
It's
mother just
about,
like you,
yeah,
a teenager just like you.
it's about people. It's not about
Okay,
the overall, it's not about the figures or the cause. It's about
that's
the
it.
actual
That's
events
it.
and the effect that it has had on individuals.
On people, people are living, you know, and
Yeah.
they deserve to be named. They deserve love. People deserve love, you know, people who are living in war zones, people who are living in refugee camps, they still have, you know, that yes, they're worrying about water, yes, they're worrying about you know, how their child will survive, yes, they're worried about malaria outbreaks. They're also thinking about their sister that they've not seen. You know, who, when was the last time you saw your sister, or this person who went missing, you know. And I think to me that's why I really enjoy reading literature. I love reading works of fiction because it's beyond just it was a war and 5 million people died, and also seeing things from different points of view, like from different sides of the Civil War, you know, why this
Yeah.
person did, why the person did that, rather than kind of just having these numbers and these figures. That doesn't move people. You know, saying
Right.
that 5
I
million
think
people died doesn't move people.
statistics are as a whole quite an empty thing
There we go.
because they are just numbers.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I would definitely say, you know, back to the question, A Woman Is No Man definitely kind of gave me that kind of uh you know, validation that this story is valid. This story needs to be written. These people's voices are valid. And then another one was Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones, who wrote An American Marriage. I know An American Marriage was like a really popular one. But Silver Sparrow is again it's a dual POV, about these two sisters who are from the same father, and one sister knows about the other sister, and the other doesn't, and it goes into like both of their lives. So we hear it from both their point of views. So really, I was just reading stories where we hear from, you know, multiple people, and we get to see different emotions. So one sister is kind of looking at the other sister. She knows that she exists, and she's kind of like wishes that she were her. She wishes that, you know, that were she had all of the attention. But then when we go to the other sister's point of view, and we see that actually she doesn't have this great life at all. She actually can't, her parents don't love each other. You know, she's very, you know, babied by her mom because, you know, they went through this stuff before. But it's, you know, it's again, I just wanted to look at stories where we don't just see one thing, where we see multiple, you know,
Yeah.
multiple things.
Which is good. I think that with this, we needed the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Because with only the one side, with only Bijou's story, I think that there wouldn't have been
You don't
enough.
get anything.
There wouldn't have been enough grit to actually get to the core of
Yeah.
why things were as they were, why she was where she was.
Yeah.
You do end up finding out, but not until quite late on in the book. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important that both their stories were told, because while obviously Bijou saw a lot of stuff, she wasn't really old enough to know about it.
Mm.
Whereas Rai actually knows all these things. She experienced
Yeah.
them. She lived through them.
Yeah.
And she saw the darker side of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Though
Yeah.
obviously at the time she was kind of like, well, I'm having a dance, I'm having fun, and that's my parents' concern, because
Yeah.
they are getting involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously her father is quite political.
He is, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important what you said, you know, just now, just that she's actually seen stuff that Bijou has never seen. Bijou has no idea is going on. You know, and Bijou's kind of oblivious to
Which
all
ties
of this
into the
stuff.
whole fairy tale romanticism of my life
Exactly.
back with my parents.
Exactly. And but when she comes to London, she gets a huge reality slap, quite literally.
Yes. I mean, they both have incredibly strong personalities as well, but
Yeah.
obviously they've been tamped down by circumstance and by expectation. And
Definitely.
I found that I loved both the characters, but at the same
Mhm.
time, I really wanted to slap Mariah and say, seriously, what are you doing? Because she's not stupid. She's an
Yeah.
intelligent woman. And it feels as though because of the circumstances that brought her to where she was
Mm.
almost oblivious, or not necessarily oblivious, blinkering herself,
Mm.
blinding herself to what really
Mm.
was going on.
Yeah. And I think again, this is why it's so important that I showed that opening scene of her being a child almost, you know, at that age, because she's had to grow up really quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it was important for people to remember that this is everything that's happened to her up until this point. She was 16.
Yeah.
You know, so she's had to do a lot of um growing up, but also there is this childlike stance about her where she still kind of has an innocence because she's kind of missed that steady, you know,
Yeah.
that steady sort of
Chance to grow up
adulting.
slowly.
Right. So she's also stuck sometimes as a 16-year-old, you know, because she kind of almost had to be 16 and then bam, just become this woman who has all of these responsibilities and there isn't really any in between, you know. And so that again, this is why it's so important that we start with her when she's young, you know, and you can see how that innocence stays with her because even when you look at the situation with her and Antoine and you're kind of like, girl, you think something weird was going on?
But I think that maybe she didn't want to see it, the
She didn't
same as
want to
I
see it.
don't think she wanted to see the stuff that was going on in the church. And there
Yeah.
were so many things that she was ignoring because
Yeah.
to see them would mean she had to acknowledge their existence.
There we go, you know, and she just wants to be a baby girl, live her best life. And you know, that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to, he bought her a whole workshop. He bought her like a whole atelier, you
Yeah.
know, where she was in Paris in the 90s, early, you know, late 80s, early 90s.
She was another creative. So
There we go.
maybe so when you see that and you read about that, you look at everything that Bijou and the fact that she didn't get to pursue her love of art
Mm,
and see that correlation and go, well, maybe she didn't want her to live the life that she lived
exactly, exactly.
and thought she was
Depressing.
doing her a favor rather than
Yeah,
giving her a choice. And I
exactly.
think that's a lot of what the story was for me. It was about
Yeah,
the path not taken, the
yeah,
choices you make,
yeah,
and facing up to the reality of the decisions you've made or have had made for you.
yeah. And I think
So
that second
definitely.
one resonates, you know, excuse me, the decisions that have been made for you. Yeah, and I think that happens to both of them, you know, things done to them, and having to do things that neither of them want to do.
Yeah, which is
Mhm.
sad,
Mhm.
but is a reflection of real life for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
I think
Yes.
everybody's had to make decisions or had decisions made that they didn't really
Yeah.
ever sit back
Yeah.
and go, thanks for doing that for me. It was great.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, I wanted again to show this, you know, this contrast because Mira is born into a wealthy family. She's not born into poverty and kind of
No.
had this hard life. She's actually born into a very, you know, wealthy, powerful family.
They're giving her an
Had lots of
allowance and everything while
an
she's traveling.
allowance, right? She's been to Paris multiple times. You know, she's traveled with her father multiple times. You know, he's buying all this expensive jewelry. Um, and I think that's, you know, she was never really meant to live a life of pain. You know, she wasn't. It's not like she was set up for. You know, she ends up in a council estate in London. You know,
And
so
that's the
it's
path that the not even the choices she made, but those that were made for her
there we
led her
go.
down.
There we go. You know, because if it had been the kind of you know, the kind of usual stereotypical immigrant story, you know, I didn't want that either, because that's again something that, you know, I think that we've seen a lot, you know, like born into poverty, I'm going to leave Congo for a better life in the UK. That was never her intention. She had a great life in Africa. She never had the intention of ever leaving. She didn't need to. You know, she had a great life. She was, you know, it was important to me to show that she actually really loved the life that she had and had no intentions, no desire to end up in
I mean, her
outside
sister's
of
a
it.
doctor,
Her sister's
and
daughter.
her sister's a doctor, and that's not the kind of life advantage that the general person living on the streets
Exactly.
in Congo would have had,
Exactly.
or
You
actually
know,
living on
and
the streets anywhere would have.
anywhere would have, you know, and so I wanted to show that, you know, it's like again, we end up in these council estates, but that doesn't mean anything about who we are. Ultimately, I really just wanted to write about people and different types of people that exist. And the world isn't black and white. It's not good and bad, evil versus whatever. It's just,
It's
you
like,
know, it's life. It's life. That's what it is.
yeah, and I think that definitely does come across. I mean, there were elements, obviously, that not everybody can relate to,
Hmm.
because everyone is different.
Hmm.
Everyone has different experiences, as you said. I mean, I grew up on a council estate, but I grew up on a council estate in a small village on the south coast,
Mm,
not
mm,
in the centre of London. So my
mm,
experience of a council estate, while you still get judged for where you grew up,
mm.
isn't exactly the same as someone who grew up
Yeah.
on a council estate in London.
Yeah. And
Because
again, even in London, it's
we had a
different.
garden.
Yeah.
Not all council estates in London have gardens.
Yeah. You know, even in London, you know, South London, North London, you know, it's different. To me, it's just, oh, this is just where people live. It's not an indication of
Who they
anything,
are.
who they
Absolutely
are.
not.
It's just where they happen to live. You know, if you talk, especially when you're talking about migrants and people who've migrated, you know, from Pakistan, from India, from Kosovo, from Poland, you know, who end up on council estates, you know. But it's no, you
Well, the thing is, the
know,
council estate is a dying breed these days.
and that's the thing. It doesn't even. It's not even. Yeah. It's with. I don't know how long they're going to be around for. That's all. And that's a whole different conversation.
Yes, that's a whole different conversation. This book is a fantastic it's a really, I'd say that it's a very hard-hitting story in many ways, because
Mm.
it does cover some very serious and quite dark subjects. But
Yes.
at the same time, it's also, there are those moments that are incredibly uplifting,
Yeah.
because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And
Definitely.
sometimes when you read a book that is trauma, just punches you with trauma in the stomach, you don't
Mm.
get that light. There isn't
Yeah.
that, not an escape exactly, but
Yeah.
a kind of a revelation.
Yeah.
And this one has that. I do love the way that it is those two circles that kind of,
Mm.
it kind of meets in the middle
Hmm.
almost. But it
Hmm.
has such a wonderful ending because, as we
Mm.
said, they had the chance to speak.
Yes.
They were able to tell their story and get the truth, not
Hmm.
their truth, the truth. And I think those
Mm.
are two very, very different things.
Definitely.
So it's a wonderful story, and I really enjoyed it. As I said, I got very, very angry, and there were moments where I was going, "It's a cult! It's a cult!" And I was quite passionate about that one, and it did make my friends laugh too,
Yeah.
because it just, there were certain things that just made my heart break,
Mm.
and I did cry. Uh, but I cry at a lot of books. To be fair, I do cry a lot. But it did make me cry, and it made me angry. But it also
Yeah.
made me happy, because
Yeah.
there was that ending. Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, so thank you for all those emotions. As a reader, it was very draining. Uh, but
As a
that's
writer, I was exhausted. Oh my
okay.
goodness.
But now you can take some time
I was
off.
exhausted. Yeah. I think they, you know, one thing they don't prepare you for is the emotions. Obviously, you have to put emotions into it.
Yeah,
And you have to kind of be, in order for me to elicit this, you know, this reaction in you, I have to put something in there.
yeah,
And that was exhausting. There were days when I would just, and because luckily, you know, pros and cons, but luckily this was written during COVID, and so I was stuck at home anyway. And then I remember some scenes, sometimes I would just write and then go to sleep because I was just done. It was just like, I need a break, need a nap.
I can completely understand why, because there was a lot went into it. There was so much emotion, so much development, and I don't think the story would have been the same without all of that. But it's difficult because it's one of those you can't say, oh, it's a lovely story, because there's so much in there that's not. So it's very difficult to sort of put into words exactly. It's
what
sort
you
of like,
feel.
it's sort of like reading Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, where all of the
I love
characters
that book.
all the characters are horrible.
I love that book so much.
One of those characters is horrible.
But I really liked the main character. I did hate her.
I didn't like them at all. I didn't
I
read it and
hate
go,
her.
I really want this wonderful thing to happen to her. But at the same time, I liked the book.
I loved everything about that book. I'm so excited for the new one. I think that, like we were talking earlier about like not having time to read. I read that because it was just absolutely everywhere. And I was like, okay, like I need to read this.
Edition. It's somewhere around here. Yes, I have.
Is that after they sold the million copies?
No, the Waterstones special edition.
Ooh, I love it. That's
which
so beautiful.
Also has the eyes on the naked hardcover as well.
I love it. I loved that book so much.
I really loved it, but I didn't like the characters, and it's so difficult when you don't like the people the book's about, but you like the book.
Yeah.
And this one, there were so many people that it didn't like, but I still loved the book because it was not a case of I didn't like them because I didn't like them, I didn't like them for a good reason.
I really liked the main character. I was drawn to the main character. I was able to, I thought I'd be like, oh my God, this is horrible. But I think it's just the fact that she got it, like she finally, you're kind of like, oh, well done, like you finally get it. Right. But also got what, like, understood what, why, obviously what she did was so wrong. It was so wrong. How did your best friend die? And you just thought that.
Yeah, but even worse, you watch your best friend die.
You watch them die. So messed up.
And then nick their book. That's a great reason to love a person.
But because she wasn't just, she wasn't just kind of like, I don't know how to put this without being like, but she was a person. This is what I will say. We had that conversation earlier. Absolutely. She wasn't a character. And this is why I liked the character, because it wasn't a character. It wasn't just horrible white person. It
made you ask the question, would I, in the same situation,
do what she did?
Especially if I had the same rubbish career.
Mm-hmm. And this is why I really enjoyed it. And I really, I didn't feel like I said, I didn't feel like she was just like a villain, just like this really horrible person. We got the backstory, of her just being absolutely crap at what she did. So mediocre,
But that's the thing. I mean, and she has this friend who is so exceptional.
Exactly.
And it does make you think.
Exactly. And she has so many awkward moments as well. And this is again like why I loved it, because she wasn't just this horrible person throughout. There are moments where I think she was going to speak at a function and they thought that she was Chinese. And then there were things that were expected, and then there were so many awkward moments for her as well. But the way that she reacts to them, she isn't like completely oblivious. No. She isn't sort of like, oh, like forget this. Even when like she meets her mum, when she meets I can't remember the person who's died, but when she meets her mother on like 2 different occasions, and she gets a diary from her with all of the notes and everything, and she's kind of thinking, I'm a horrible person for doing this. But this is why I was able to read the book and not to feel like this is just a stereotype of a really terrible white person. I think that's where the book went really well. It wasn't just we've put this white person here and you're just supposed to hate them. You
Yeah.
know,
That's the thing,
she
I
had
didn't.
dreams.
Yes, she did. I didn't. The thing is, I didn't hate her. I just
Yeah,
didn't
just didn't
like
like
her.
her.
She wasn't a nice person. The fact that she
Hmm.
was aware of the things she'd done wrong,
Yeah,
yet carried on doing them, just
yeah,
reinforced the fact that she wasn't nice.
yeah. But she was always questioning herself. You know,
She
she was
that's
always, she
that's
had a
it though.
conscience.
She did have a
You
conscience,
know,
but she didn't
she has
act
a
on it.
conscience. Yes. But again, it comes down to people, you know,
Yeah,
and again, we have her backstory. And again, what is it that she wanted? She wanted the fame.
yeah.
She was a
She was
shit
jealous.
writer. She was a sorry, crap writer.
Yeah,
She was
she was
jealous of her
jealous.
friend.
She
Yeah,
was
of
massively jealous
everything.
of her. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But
Because her
then
friend, she was also from a well-to-do family, right? Like, because
she was quite well to
she's,
do, and
yeah,
she obviously
well-to-do.
they both had very good education. They both
There we
went to the same
go.
schools and everything. But
Yeah.
she just got not even she didn't just get lucky, she was talented.
Yes. Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
wasn't restricted to one genre and everything else. So she was the perfect author.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
She was
it's understandable that somebody less successful would feel envy. But
definitely.
that brings it down to that was one novel where I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't think any of them had huge redeeming qualities
At all.
at all. But
At all.
the book was very well done. It was a well
Mm.
written, enjoyable
I loved it.
novel.
I loved it.
And this one
Absolutely loved it.
has a similar tone in that there are a lot of characters in there that you don't like.
Mm.
But then you read their backstory, because obviously you get some of their backstories, and you think, well,
Yeah.
actually, I get them now.
Yeah.
And this book gives you the chance to do that. It gives you the
That's
chance
it.
to read their backstory, to understand where they're coming from,
That's
and
it.
learn why they are who they are at this
Yeah.
point. And
Yeah.
also,
Because people are people.
yeah,
Life makes us become ugly people, you know.
which is
And we
bad,
can all sit here. It is very sad, but you know, we can sit here and say, "Oh, I would never."
but would we?
Would we? You know, life, the things that you know that happen, that you know, things that the choices that people have to make. And I think that's it for me. That's, you know, what's interesting for me is people. I definitely love a plot. Like I said, I really wanted a plot. I didn't want this just to be about characters.
Yeah,
And you know, I wanted there to be a clear plot, and I wanted there to be, you know, for you to sort of ask, okay, well, how's this going to end? Rather than just kind of, you know,
yeah.
this is character A, this is character B, this is character C. But yeah, it's the people. And you know, I had lots of fun as well writing. So like there are some characters that I really enjoyed writing, and I would love to, you know, have had more of them in the book. Like Chansey,
Yeah,
she
she's
was just
brilliant.
such. I loved her so much. I wish she were real. I just wish she were. I just wish that she were real. I just feel like, oh my God, we'd be such great friends if you were a real person.
But that's it though, isn't it? You're writing people that you would like to meet.
Yeah, I love Chelsea. She was very, you know, every time I wrote her a scene with her, you know, kind of bringing her to life was just very, you know, it was such a breath of fresh air. And it was really where the fun in creating happened, you know, because the other stories are so heavy. But even, you know, even me as, you know, all of the shenanigans she gets up to, I love writing that, you know, those bits as well. But Chansey for me, um, she was definitely one of my favorite characters, and I enjoyed so much. And even her, you know, she does something that isn't so great as well. And again, it's like she's not just this like one-dimensional character who's just perfect all the time. She, you know, she does
Yeah.
something that isn't very nice at one
Because
point.
that's the thing, I think that nobody is perfect.
Mm.
And when it comes to characters, I love Abdul Razak Gurna's characters, but he
Mm.
writes stories that are characters. They're not plot driven.
No, that's
They are
it.
driven by the person.
That's it.
And you follow these people through their lives, and they are very gentle stories. There isn't a massive plot or events occurring that are
Yeah.
so. I mean, he does write. Well, granted, he has written trauma. I'm looking at Paradise right now, thinking, yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
of it that wasn't great because it happens during a civil war. But
Mhm.
it is more about the people than it is
Yeah.
about an event.
Yeah.
So he writes very, very similar kind of heavy, strong
Yeah.
characters, but he doesn't write the plot.
Yeah.
And I like that about his stories as well. I find them quite gentle. But
Yeah.
we could probably talk for hours.
I know. It's like my third cup of tea.
But it's been wonderful talking to you about this. And I'm going to say, tell everyone more about the book, when it's coming out, and where they can find you if you've got socials.
Yes, so the book is called Where You Go, I Will Go. It's coming out the 8th of May, and I'm just like, my heart is beating, just like hearing that. I'm just like, You can just find it online, all of the, your major bookstores. The audiobook will be out just after the hardback. I love audiobooks, so if you're an audiobook person, definitely get it. It's available to pre-order now, and I am online on Instagram, Christina Fonthes, so Christina the CHR, and then Fonthes Fonthes on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, I will link that, and I will also link where you can get the book.
Thank
you.
you.
It's definitely worth reading, and it will, if you are an emotional reader like me, it will make you cry. And it will make you angry, but it will make you cry.
I'm sorry, but yeah, at least you feel something.
Emotional depth is a good thing. But thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's been a great conversation about pretty much everything, including your face.
Yeah, pretty much everything.
And I think honest feelings on people versus one-dimensional characterization.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Thank you so much, and really good luck with the book launch, because I know it's going to be a busy few weeks for you.
Can you see the terror?
Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you to Christina for joining me to talk about her novel. I just wanted to mention that if you've been listening for a while, and possibly to last week's episode, you will know that raising money for cancer research is really important to me. And that's why I will be taking part in Live Stream for the Cure again this year. Taking place from the 16th to the 17th of May, it's a really fun event with loads of your favourite podcasters doing silly things on a Twitch stream to raise money for the Cancer Research Institute. I'll post the link in the info box so you can find out even more and donate if you don't want to listen. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family? Please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you might listen. You can follow me on Instagram as BeingBookishPod and on X as being_bookish. Also, I have a TikTok, so you can follow me over there on @BeingBookishReviews. You can also find many of these episodes and some video content on my YouTube channel, Ray Loves Reading. And of course, you've always got my website, beingbookish.co.uk. And until next time, this is me saying farewell.